Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Alright, so we can go ahead and start with text 23.
Text 23. Upadrastano mantacha pratabhokta maheswaraha paramatmite chapyokto dehismim purusha paraha. Translation. Yet in this body there is another, a transcendental enjoyer, who is the Lord, the Supreme Proprietor, who exists as the overseer and permitter, and who is known as the Supersoul. Purport. It is stated here that the Supersoul, who is always with the individual soul, is a representation of the Supreme Lord. He is not an ordinary living entity. Because the monist philosophers take the knower of the body to be one, they think that there is no difference between the Supersoul and the individual soul. To clarify this, the Lord says that He is represented as the Paramatma in everybody. He is different from the individual soul. He is para, transcendental. The individual soul enjoys the activities of a particular field, but the Supersoul is present not as a finite enjoyer, nor as one taking part in the body activities, but as the witness, overseer, permitter, and supreme enjoyer. His name is Paramatma, not Atma, and he is transcendental. It is distinctly clear that the Atma and Paramatma are different. The Supersoul, the Paramatma, has legs and hands everywhere, but the individual soul does not. And because the Paramatma is the Supreme Lord, he is present within to sanction the individual soul's desiring material enjoyment. Without the sanction of the Supreme Soul, the individual soul cannot do anything. The individual is Bhukta, or the sustained, and the Lord Bhukta is the maintainer. There are innumerable living entities, and he is seen in them as a friend. The fact is that every individual living entity is eternally part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, and both of them are very intimately related as friends. But the living entity has the tendency to reject the sanction of the Supreme Lord and act independently in an attempt to dominate nature. And because he has this tendency, he is called the marginal energy of the Supreme Lord. The living entity can be situated either in the material energy or the spiritual energy. As long as he is conditioned by the material energy, the Supreme Lord, as his friend, the Supersoul, stays with him just to get him to return to the spiritual energy. The Lord is always eager to take him back to the spiritual energy, but due to his minute independence, the individual entity is continually rejecting the association of spiritual light. This misuse of independence is the cause of his material strife in the conditioned nature. The Lord, therefore, is always giving instructions from within and from without. From without, he gives instructions as stated in Bhagavad Gita, and from within, he tries to convince the living entity that his activities in the material field are not conducive to real happiness. Just give it up to me and turn your faith towards me. Then you will be happy, he says. Thus, the intelligent person who places his faith in the Paramatma, or the Supreme Personality of Godhead, begins to advance towards the blissful eternal life of knowledge. Text 24. Ya evam vete purusham prakritim cha gunai saha sarvatad vata manopi nasa bhuyo bijayate. Translation. One who understands this philosophy concerning material nature, the living entity, and the interaction of the modes of nature is sure to attain liberation. He will not take birth here again, regardless of his present position. Purport. Clear understanding of material nature, the supersoul, the individual soul, and the interrelation makes one eligible to become liberated and turn to the spiritual atmosphere without being forced to return to this material nature. This is the result of knowledge. The purpose of knowledge is to understand distinctly that the living entity has by chance fallen into this material existence. By his personal endeavor, in association with authorities, saintly persons, and a spiritual master, he has to understand his position and then revert to spiritual consciousness or Krishna consciousness by understanding Bhagavad Gita as it is, explained by the personality of Godhead. Then it is certain that he will never come again into this material existence. He will be transferred into the spiritual world for a blissful eternal life of knowledge. Text 25. Deyani natmani pashyanti kichit atmanam atmana anishaknyena yogena karma yogena chapare. Translation. Some perceive the super soul within themselves through meditation, others through the cultivation of knowledge, and still others through working without fruitive desires. And still others through working without fruitive desires. Wow. Purport. The Lord affirms Arjuna that the conditioned souls can be divided into two classes as far as man's search for self-realization is concerned. Those who are atheists, agnostic, and skeptics are beyond the sense of spiritual understanding. But there are others who are faithful in their understanding of spiritual life, and they are called introspective devotees, philosophers, and workers who have renounced fruitive results. Those who always try to establish the doctrine of monism are also counted among the atheists and agnostic. In other words, only the devotees of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are best situated in spiritual understanding because they understand that beyond this material nature are the spiritual world and the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is expanding as Paramatma, the Super Soul in everyone, the all-pervading Godhead. Of course, there are those who try to understand the Supreme Absolute Truth by cultivation of knowledge, and they can be counted in the class of the faithful. The Sanga philosophers can analyze this material world in 24 elements, and they place the individual soul as the 25th item. When they are able to understand the nature of the individual soul to be transcendental to the material elements, they are able to understand also that above the individual soul there is a Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is the 26th element. Thus, gradually, they also come to the standard of devotion service in Krishna consciousness. Those who work without fruitive results are also perfect in their attitude. They are given a chance to advance to the platform of devotion service in Krishna consciousness. Here it is stated that there are some people who are pure in consciousness and who try to find out the super soul by meditation, and when they discover the super soul within themselves, they become transcendently situated. Similarly, there are others who try also to understand the Supreme Soul by cultivation of knowledge, and there are others who cultivate the Hatha Yoga system and who try to satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead by childish activities.
All right, so you
Text 26.
You can hold it. All right. So text 26. Anyete evam ajananta shrutva yebhya upasate tepi chati taranti eva mrityum shruti parayana. Again, there are those who, although not conversant in spiritual knowledge, begin to worship the Supreme Person upon hearing about him from others. Because of their tendency to hear from authorities, they also transcend the path of birth and death. Purport. This verse is particularly applicable to modern society because in modern society there is practically no education in spiritual matters. Some of the people may appear to be atheistic or agnostic or philosophical, but actually there is no knowledge of philosophy. As for the common man, if he is a good soul, then there is a chance for advancement by hearing. This hearing process is very important. Lord Chaitanya, who preached Krishna consciousness in the modern world, gave stress to hearing because if the common man simply hears from the authoritative sources, he can progress, especially according to Lord Chaitanya, if he hears the transcendental vibration Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. It is stated therefore that all men should take advantage of hearing from realized souls and gradually become able to understand everything. The worship of the Supreme Lord will then undoubtedly take place. Lord Chaitanya has said that in this age no one needs to change his position, but one should give up the endeavor to understand the absolute truth by speculative reasoning. One should learn to become the servants of those who are in knowledge of the Supreme Lord. If one is fortunate enough to take shelter of a pure devotee, hear from him about self-realization, and follow in his footsteps, one will be gradually elevated to the position of a pure devotee. In this verse particularly, the process of hearing is strongly recommended, and this is very appropriate, although the common man is often not as capable as his so-called philosophers. As so-called philosophers, faithful hearing from an authoritative person will help one transcend this material existence and go back to Godhead, back to home. Yavat sanjayate kinchit sattvam shtavarajjangamam kshetra sejagya samyogat tadvidhi bharatarshabha. O chief of the Bharatas, know that whatever you see in existence, both moving and the non-moving, is only a combination of the field of activities and the knower of the field. Purport. Both material nature and the living entity, which were existing before the creation of the cosmos, are explained in this verse. Whatever is created is but a combination of the living entity and material nature. There are many manifestations like trees, mountains, and hills which are not moving, and there are many existences which are moving. All of them are but combinations of material nature and the superior nature. The living entity, without the touch of the superior nature, the living entity, nothing can grow. The relationship between material nature and spiritual nature is eternally going on, and this combination is effected by the Supreme Lord. Therefore, he is the controller of both the inferior and superior natures. The material nature is created by him, and the superior nature is placed in this material nature, and thus all these activities and manifestations take place. Text 28. Samam sarveshu bhuteshu tishtantam parameshwaram vidasyasva vinasyantam ya pashyati sapashyati. One who sees the super soul accompanying the individual soul in all bodies, and who actually understands that neither the soul nor the super soul within the indestructible body, neither the soul nor the super soul within the destructible body is ever destroyed. He actually sees. Purport. Anyone who by good association can see things, three things combined together: the body, the proprietor of the body, or the individual soul, and the friend of the individual soul is actually in knowledge. Unless one has the association of a real knower of spiritual subjects, one cannot see these three things. Those who do not have such association are ignorant. They simply see the body, and they think that when the body is destroyed, everything is finished. But actually, it is not so. After the destruction of the body, both the soul and the supersoul exist, and they go on eternally in many various moving and non-moving forms. The Sanskrit word Parameshvara is sometimes treated as the individual soul, because the soul is a master of the body, and after the destruction of the body, he transfers to another form. In that way, he is master. But there are others who interpret this Parameshvara to be the supersoul. In either case, both the supersoul and the individual soul can continue. They are not destroyed. One who can see in this way can actually see what is happening. 752. Alright, Mataji, please accept my obeisances. Glories to Prabhupada. And
Hare Krishna.
Hare
Please
Krishna.
accept my obeisances.
So we had text 29 of chapter 13, and if you can read from there.
Yes. 29. Samam pashyan hi sarvatra samavashitam ishvaram na hi nasti atmanatmanam tato yati param gatim. One who sees the super soul equally present everywhere, in every living being, does not degrade himself by his mind. Thus, he approaches the transcendental destination. Purport: the living entity, by accepting his material existence, has become situated differently than in his spiritual existence. But if one understands that the Supreme is situated in his Paramatma manifestation everywhere, that is, if one can see the presence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in every living thing, he does not degrade himself by a destructive mentality, and he therefore gradually advances to the spiritual world. The mind is generally addicted to sense gratifying process, but when the mind turns to the Supreme Super Soul, one becomes advanced in spiritual understanding. Text 30. Prakrityaiva cha karmani kriyamanani sarvashah yah pasyati tadhatmanam akartaram sapasyati. One who can see that all activities are performed by the body, which is created of material nature, and sees that the self does nothing, actually sees. Purport: this body is made by material nature under the direction of the Super Soul, and whatever activities are going on in respect to one's body are not his doing. Whatever one is supposed to do, either for happiness or for distress, one is forced to do because of the bodily construction. The self, however, is outside all these bodily activities. This body is given according to one's past desires. To fulfill desires, one is given the body, with which he acts accordingly. Practically speaking, the body is a machine designed by the Supreme Lord to fulfill desires. Because of desires, one is put into difficult circumstances to suffer or to enjoy. This transcendental vision of the living entity, when developed, makes one separate from bodily activities. One who has such a vision is an actual seer. Text 31. Yada bhuta prithak bhavam eka stham anupashyati tata eva cha vistaram Brahma sampadyate tada. When a sensible man ceases to see different identities due to different material bodies, and he sees how beings are expanded everywhere, he attains to the Brahman conception. Purport. When one can see that the various bodies of living entities arise due to the different desires of the individual soul and do not actually belong to the soul itself, one actually sees. In the material conception of life, we find someone a demigod, someone a human being, a dog, a cat, etc. This is material vision, not actual vision. This material differentiation is due to material conception of life. After the destruction of the material body, the spirit soul is one. The spirit soul, due to contact with material nature, gets different types of bodies. When one can see this, he attains spiritual vision, thus being freed from differentiations like man, animal, big, low, etc. One becomes purified in his consciousness and able to develop Krishna consciousness in his spiritual identity. How he then sees things will be explained in the next verse. Text 32. Should I stop here? Or can I continue?
Yeah, you can continue.
Okay. Text 32. Anaditvam nirgunatvat paramatmayam avyayah sarirasthopi kaunteya nakarati nalipyate. Those with the vision of eternity can see that imperishable soul is transcendental, eternal, and beyond the modes of nature. Despite contact with the material body, O Arjuna, the soul neither does anything nor is entangled. Purport. A living entity appears to be born because of the birth of the material body, but actually the living entity is eternal. He is not born, and in spite of his being situated in a material body, he is transcendental and eternal. Thus he cannot be destroyed. By nature he is full of bliss. How does not engage himself in any material activities? Therefore, the activities performed due to his contact with material bodies do not entangle him. Text 33. Yatha sarva gatam saukshmyat akasamno palipyate sarvatravashito dehe tathatmapno palipyate. The sky, due to its subtle nature, does not mix with anything, although it is all-pervading. Similarly, the soul situated in Brahman vision does not mix with the body, though situated in that body. Purport. The air enters into water, mud, stool, and whatever else is there. Still, it does not mix with anything. Similarly, the living entity, even though situated in varieties of bodies, is aloof from them due to his subtle nature. Therefore, it is impossible to see with the material eyes how the living entity is in contact with this body and how he is out of it after the destruction of the body. No one in science can ascertain this.
Okay, you can hold that. And Lord, could we continue from text 34?
Text 34. Yata Prakash Kayasyate Eka Krishnam Lokam Imam Ravi Krishram Krishtre Tata Krishnam Prakashyate Bharata. Translation. O son of Bharat, as the sun alone illuminates all this universe, so that the living entity, one within the body, illuminates the entire body by consciousness. Purport. There are various theories regarding consciousness. Here in Bhagavad Gita, the example of the sun and the sunshine is given. As the sun is situated in one place but is illuminating the whole universe, so a small particle of spirit soul, although situated in the heart of this body, is illuminating the whole body by consciousness. Thus, consciousness is the proof of the presence of the soul, as sunshine or light is the proof of the presence of the sun. When the soul is present in the body, there is consciousness all over the body, and as soon as the soul has passed from the body, there is no more consciousness. This can be easily understood by an intelligent man. Therefore, consciousness is not a product of the combination of matter. It is a symptom of the living entity. The consciousness of the living entity, although qualitatively one with the Supreme Consciousness, is not supreme, because the consciousness of one particular body does not share that of another body. But the super soul, which is situated in all bodies as the friend of the individual soul, is conscious of all bodies. That is the difference between supreme consciousness and individual consciousness. Text 35. Setre setre jayor evam antaram jana kakshusha bhuta pakriti moksham cha ye vidur yanti ti param. Translation. Those who see with eyes of knowledge the difference between the body and the knower of the body, and can also understand the process of liberation from bondage in material nature, attain the supreme goal. Purport. The purport of this 13th chapter is that one should know the distinction between the body, the owner of the body, and the and the super soul. One should recognize the process of liberation as described in verses 8 to 12. Then one can go on to the supreme destination. A faithful person should at first have good association to hear God and thus gradually become enlightened. If one accepts a spiritual master, one can learn to distinguish between matter and spirit, and that becomes the stepping stone for further spiritual realization. A spiritual master, by various instructions, teaches his students to get free from the material concept of life. For instance, in Bhagavad Gita, we find Krishna instructing Arjuna to free him from materialistic considerations. One can understand that this body is matter. It can be analyzed with the 24 elements. The body is the gross manifestation, and the subtle manifestation is the mind and psychological effects. And the symptoms of life are the interaction of these features. But over and above this, there is the soul, and there is also the supersoul. The soul and the supersoul are two. This material world is working by the conjunction of the soul and the 24 material elements. One who can see the constitution of the whole material manifestation as a combination of the soul and the material elements, and can also see the situation of the Supreme Soul, becomes eligible to transfer to the spiritual world. These things are meant for contemplation and for realization, and one should have a complete understanding of this chapter with the help of the spiritual master. Thus ends the Bhakti Vedanta purports to the 13th chapter of Srimad Bhagavad Gita in the matter of nature, the enjoyer, and consciousness. Chapter 14. The three modes of material nature. Text number 1. Sri Bhagavan Uvacha Param Bhoya Pravikshyami Janam Uttamam Ya Jantva Moya Sarve Param Siddham Ito Gata. Translation. The Supreme Person of Godhead said, Again I shall declare to you this supreme wisdom, the best of all knowledge, knowing which all the sages have attained the supreme perfection. Purport. From the 7th chapter to the end of the 12th chapter, Sri Krishna in detail reveals the absolute truth, the Supreme Person of Godhead. Now, the Lord Himself further enlightened Arjuna. If one understands this chapter through the process of philosophical speculation, he will come to an understanding of devotional service. In the 13th chapter, it was clearly explained that by humbly developing knowledge, one may possibly be free from material entanglement. It has also been explained that it is due to association with the modes of nature that the living entity is entangled in this material world. Now, in this chapter, the Supreme Personality explains what these modes of nature are, how they act, how they bind, and how they give liberation. The knowledge explained in this chapter is proclaimed by the Supreme Lord to be superior to the knowledge given so far in other chapters. By understanding this knowledge, various great sages attain perfection and transfer to the spiritual world. The Lord now explains the same knowledge in a better way. This knowledge is far superior to all other processes of knowledge thus far explained, and knowing this many attain perfection. Thus it is expected that one who understands this 14th chapter will attain perfection. Text number 2. Idam janam upashritya mama sadrem yam agata sargepi nopajayante pralayena viyatanti cha. Translation. By becoming fixed in this knowledge, one can attain to the transcendental nature like my own. Thus established, one is not born at the time of creation or disturbed at the time of dissolution. Purport. After acquiring perfect transcendental knowledge, one acquires qualitative equality with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, becoming free from the repetition of birth and death. One does not, however, lose his identity as an individual soul. It is understood from Vedic literature that the liberated souls who have reached the transcendental planets of the spiritual sky always look to the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord, being engaged in his transcendental loving service. So, even after liberation, the devotees do not lose their individual identities. Generally, in the material world, whatever knowledge we get is contaminated by the three modes of material nature. Knowledge which is not contaminated by the three modes of nature is called transcendental knowledge. As soon as one is situated in transcendental knowledge, he is on the same platform as the Supreme Person. Those who have no knowledge of the spiritual sky hold that after being free from the material activities on the material form, this spiritual identity becomes formless, without any variegatedness. However, just as there is material variegatedness in this world, in the spiritual world there is also variegatedness. Those in ignorance of this think the spiritual existence is opposed to the material variety. But actually, in the spiritual sky, one attains a spiritual form. There are spiritual activities, and the spiritual situation is called devotional life. The atmosphere is said to be uncontaminated, and there one is equal in quality with the Supreme Lord. To attain such knowledge, one must develop all the spiritual qualities. One who thus develops his spiritual qualities is not affected either by the creation nor by the destruction of the material world. Continue, Prabhu, or? Okay, well.
Yeah, can you stop here? All right, and Mataji, if you can read, can you continue from text 3?
Yes, thank you, Prabhu. I can read one more text, okay, and then we'll have to leave.
Okay.
Text 3. Mama Yoni Mahat Sarva Bhuts called Brahman. Purport. This is an explanation of the world. Everything that takes place is due to the combination of Kshetra and Kshetragya, the body and the spirit soul. This combination of material nature and the living entity is made possible by the Supreme God Himself. The Mahat Tattva is the total cause of the total cosmic manifestation, and that total substance of the material cause, in which there are three modes of nature, is sometimes called Brahman. The Supreme Personality impregnates that total substance, and thus innumerable universes become possible. This total material substance, the Mahat Tattva, is described as Brahman in the Vedic literature. Mundaka Upanishad 1.1.9. Tasmat etad Brahma nama rupam annam cha jayate. The Supreme Person impregnates that Brahman with the seeds of the living entities. The 24 elements, beginning from earth, water, fire, and air, are all material energy, and they constitute what is called Mahat Brahma, or the great Brahman, the material nature. As explained in the 7th chapter, beyond this there is another superior nature, the living entity. Into material nature, the superior nature is mixed by the will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and thereafter all living entities are born in this material nature. The scorpion lays its eggs in piles of rice, and sometimes it is said that the scorpion is born out of rice. But the rice is not the cause of the scorpion. Actually, the eggs were laid by the mother. Similarly, material nature is not the cause of the birth of the living entities. The seed is given by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and they only seem to come out as products of material nature. Thus, every living entity, according to his past activities, has a different body created by this material nature, so that the entity can enjoy or suffer according to his past deeds. The Lord is the cause of all the manifestations of living entities in this material world.
All right, so you're going to stop there, right?
Yes.
Okay. That's your text for Sarva Yonishu Kaunteya Mutaya Sambhavantiya Tasam Brahma Mahadyonir Aham Bija Pradapita. It is to be understood that all species of life, O son of Kunti, are made possible by birth in this material nature, and that I am the seed-giving Father. In this verse, it is clearly explained that the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, is the original Father of all living entities. The living entities are a combination of the material nature and the spiritual nature. Such entities are seen not only on this planet, but on every planet, even on the highest, where Brahma is situated. Everywhere there are living entities within the earth. Everywhere there are living entities. Within the earth there are living entities, even within the water and within fire. All these appearances are due to the mother, material nature, and Krishna's seed-giving process. The purport that the material world is impregnated with living entities who come out in various forms at the time of creation according to their past deeds. Text 5. Sattvam rajas tama iti guna prakriti sambhava nibadnanti mahabaho dehe dehi namavyayam. Material nature consists of three modes: goodness, passion, and ignorance. When the internal living entity comes in contact with nature, Almighty Amrajuna, he becomes conditioned by these modes. Purport. The living entity, because he is transcendental, has nothing to do with this material nature. Still, because he has become conditioned by the material world, he is acting under the spell of the three modes of material nature. Because living entities have different kinds of bodies in terms of the different aspects of nature, they are induced to act according to that nature. This is the cause of the varieties of happiness and distress. And text 6. Tatra sattvam nirmalatvat prakashakam anamayam sukha sangena badnati jnana sangena chanaga. O sinless one, the mode of goodness, being purer than the others, is illuminating, and it frees one from all sinful reactions. Those situated in the mode of goodness become conditioned by a sense of happiness and knowledge. Purport. The living entity is conditioned by material nature are of various types. One is happy, another is very active, and another is helpless. All these types of psychological manifestations are causes of the entity's conditioned status in nature. How they are differently conditioned is explained in this section of Bhagavad Gita. The mode of goodness is first considered. The effect of developing the mode of goodness in the material world is that one becomes wiser than those otherwise conditioned. A man in the mode of goodness is not so much affected by material miseries, and he has a sense of advancement in material knowledge. The representative type is the Brahmin, who is supposed to be situated in the mode of goodness. This sense of happiness is due to understanding that in the mode of goodness, one is more or less free from sinful reactions. Actually, in the Vedic literature, it is said that the mode of goodness means greater knowledge and a greater sense of happiness. The difficulty here is that when a living entity is situated in the mode of goodness, he becomes conditioned to feel that he is advanced in knowledge and is better than others. In this way, he becomes conditioned. The best examples are the scientist and the philosopher. Each is very proud of his knowledge, and because they generally improve their living conditions, they feel a sort of material happiness. This sense of advanced happiness in conditioned life makes them bound by the mode of goodness of material nature. As such, they are attracted toward working in the mode of goodness, and as long as they have an attraction for working in that way, they have to take some type of body in the modes of nature. Thus, there is no likelihood of liberation or of being transferred to the spiritual world. Repeatedly, one may become a philosopher, a scientist, and a poet, and repeatedly become entangled in the same disadvantages of birth and death. But, due to the illusion of material energy, one thinks that this sort of life is pleasant. Text 7. Rajo ragatmakam vidhi Krishna Sanga samudbhavam tan nibhadnanti kaunteya karma sange nadehinam. The mode of passion is born of unlimited desires and longings, O son of Kunti, and because of this, the embodied living entity is bound to material fruitive actions. Purport. The mode of passion is characterized by the attraction between man and woman. Woman has attraction for man and man has attraction for woman. This is called the mode of passion. When the mode of passion is increased, one develops the hankering for material enjoyment. He wants to enjoy sense gratification. For sense gratification, a man in the mode of passion wants some honor in society or in the nation, and he wants to have a happy family with nice children, wife, and house. These are the products of the mode of passion. As long as one is hankering after these things, he has to work very hard. Therefore, it is clearly stated here that he becomes associated with the fruits of his activities and thus becomes bound by such activities. In order to please his wife, children, and society, and to keep up his prestige, one has to work. Therefore, the whole material world is more or less in the mode of passion. Modern civilization is considered to be advanced to the standard of the mode of passion. Formerly, the advanced condition was considered to be in the mode of goodness. If there is no liberation for those in the mode of goodness, what to speak of those who are entangled in the mode of passion? All right.
Tamastvam janajam vidi mohinam savadehinam Pamadarasya nidrabish tan nibi nibadnanti bharata. Translation. O son of Bharat, know that the mode of darkness, born of ignorance, is the delusion of an embodied living entities. The results of this mode are madness, indulgence, adolescence, and sleep, which bind the conditioned soul. Purport. In this verse, the specific application of the word to is very significant. This means that the mode of ignorance is a very peculiar qualification of the embodied soul. The mode of ignorance is just the opposite of the mode of goodness. In the mode of goodness, by development of knowledge, one can understand what is what, but the mode of ignorance is just the opposite. Everyone under the spell of the mode of ignorance becomes mad, and the madman cannot understand what is what. Instead of making advancements, one becomes degraded. The definition of the mode of ignorance is stated in the Vedic literature. Vatsu yatatmya Vatsu yatamya jananvarkaram viparyaya gana janakam tama. Under the spell of ignorance, one cannot understand a thing as it is. For example, everyone can see that his grandfather has died and therefore he will also die. Man is mortal. The children that he conceives will also die. So death is sure. Still, people are madly accumulating money and working very hard all day and night, not caring for the eternal spirit. This is madness. In their madness, they are very reluctant to make advancement in spiritual understanding. Such people are very lazy. When they are invited to associate for spiritual understanding, they are not much interested. They are not even active like the man who is controlled by the mode of passion. That's another symptom of one embedded in the mode of ignorance, is that he sleeps more than is required. 6 hours of sleep is sufficient, but a man in the mode of ignorance sleeps at least 10 or 12 hours a day. Such a man appears to be always dejected and is addicted to intoxication and sleeping. These are the symptoms of a person conditioned by the mode of ignorance. Text 9. Sattvam sukhi sanjayate raja karmani bharata janam avritya to tama parmade sanjayate yota. Translation. O son of Bharat, the mode of goodness conditions one to happiness. Passion conditions one to fruitive action, and ignorance covering one's knowledge binds one to madness. Purport. A person in the mode of goodness is satisfied by his work or intellectual pursuit, just as a philosopher, scientist, or educator may be engaged in a particular field of knowledge and may be satisfied in that way. A man in the mode of passion may be engaged in fruitive activity. He owns as much as he can and spends for good causes. Sometimes he tries to open hospitals, give to charity institutions, etc. These are the signs of one in the mode of passion. And the mode of ignorance covers knowledge. In the mode of ignorance, whatever one does is good neither for him nor for anyone. In the mode of ignorance, whatever one does is good neither for him nor for anyone. Text number 10. Rajas tamas cha bhuya sattvam bhavati bharata rajas sattvam tamas chaiva tamas sattvam rajas tata. Translation. Sometimes the mode of goodness becomes prominent, defeating the modes of passion and ignorance, O son of Bharata. Sometimes the mode of passion defeats goodness and ignorance, and at other times ignorance defeats goodness and passion. In this way, there is always competition for supremacy. Purport. When the mode of passion is permanent, the mode of goodness and ignorance are defeated. When the mode of goodness is permanent, passion and ignorance are defeated. And when the mode of ignorance is permanent, passion and goodness are defeated. This competition is always going on. Therefore, one who is actually intent on advancing the Krishna consciousness has to transcend these three modes. The prominence of some certain modes of nature is manifested in one's dealings, in his activities, in eating, etc. All this we have explained in later chapters. But if one wants, he can develop by practice the mode of goodness and thus defeat the modes of ignorance and passion. One can similarly develop the mode of passion and defeat goodness and ignorance, or one can develop the mode of ignorance and defeat goodness and passion. Although there are these three modes of material nature, if one is determined, he can be blessed by the mode of goodness, and by transcending the mode of goodness, he can be situated in pure goodness, which is called the Vasudeva state, a state in which one can understand the science of God. By the manifestation of particular activities, it can be understood in what mode of nature one is situated.
32. Next 10. So that is going to be 1410. Okay. So we finished this chapter, chapter 15. In that chapter it said, yet there is another body, a transcendental enjoyer, who is the Lord, who crucifies them, who exists as the overseer and permitter. He is the most. We're talking about the body and the skin. There is also the individual soul enjoys the activities of a particular field, but the super soul is present not as finite, not as a finite enjoyer, nor as one taking part in bodily activities, but he is there as a witness, the overseer, the permitter, the supreme enjoyer, and his name is Paramatma, not Atma, and he is transcendental. So without the sanction of the Supreme Soul, the individual soul cannot do anything. The individual is called Bhukta, and the Lord is called Bhokta, or maintainer. There are innumerable living entities, and he is staying within them as a friend. So one who understands this philosophy concerning material nature, the living entity, and the interaction of the modes of nature is sure to attain liberation. He will not take birth here again, regardless of his present position. So one who sees the Supersoul equally present everywhere in every living being does not degrade himself by his mind. In that way he approaches the transcendental destination. Those with the vision of eternity can see that the imperishable soul is transcendental, eternal, and beyond the modes of nature. Despite contact with the material body, O Arjuna, the soul neither does anything nor is entangled. It is said that the air enters into water, mud, stool, and whatever else there is, still it does not mix with anything. Similarly, the living entity, even though situated in varieties of bodies, is aloof for them, due to his subtle nature. Therefore, it is impossible to see with the material eyes how the living entity is in contact with this body and how he is out of it after the destruction of the body. No one in science can ascertain this. So, here it is saying that the living entity, even though situated in varieties of bodies, is aloof from them due to his subtle nature. So, in the purport, it was said that he is not even entangled. So, the thing about it is that our consciousness becomes polluted by the material atmosphere. And in that way, we become entangled. But really and truly, the spirit soul cannot become entangled. At the tiny moment he decides to let it all go, he becomes free. So, O son of Bharat, as the sun alone illuminates all this universe, so does the living entity, one with the body, illuminate the entire body by consciousness. And it is said that consciousness is the symptom of the soul. So those who can see with the eyes of knowledge the difference between the body and the know of the body can also understand the process of liberation from bondage in material nature and attain the supreme goal. The material nature world is working under the conjunction of the soul and the 24 elements. One who can see the constitution of the whole material manifestation as this combination of the soul and material elements can also see the situation of the Supreme Soul. He becomes eligible for transfer to the spiritual world. These things are meant for contemplation and for realization, and one should have a complete understanding of the 13th chapter with the help of the spiritual master. So that was nature, the enjoyer, and consciousness. And then chapter 14 is the three modes of material nature. And here again, Krishna is saying this knowledge is far superior to all the other processes of knowledge, thus far explained. Knowing this, many has attained perfection. Thus it is expected that one who understands this 14th chapter will attain perfection. So even though it is said that after the 12th chapter we got full transcendental knowledge, here Krishna is saying that this knowledge of the three modes of material nature is far superior to all the other processes. And then he explains the mode of goodness, the mode of passion, and the mode of ignorance. And then there's that actual competition between the modes of material nature for supremacy. So in a mode of goodness, which is purer than the others, that's illuminating and frees one from all sinful reactions. And those situated in that mode become conditioned by a sense of happiness and knowledge. But Prabhupada says in the purport that you can become a philosopher or a scientist for many, many births, still not understand the personality of Godhead. So then it talks about the mode of passion, which is born of unlimited desires and longings. And because of this, the embodied living entity is bound to material fruitive action. Thinking by his desire and his activity, he will achieve so much pleasure in this material world. Not so much happiness, but pleasure. So the mode of passion actually goes to pleasure. And it is said that sex desire is born of the mode of passion. And that attraction between man and woman is born of the mode of passion. This is why the world continues to populate itself. The population continues to increase. So the mode of darkness is born of ignorance and is the delusion of all living entities. And the results of this mode are madness, indolence, and sleep, which bind the conditioned soul. But since the modes are mixed, there is a bit of the mode of darkness or the mode of ignorance, the mode of passion, and the mode of goodness. And because they're vying for supremacy, that makes a difference in the way people see things. So there might be an intelligent person who can understand philosophy and who is very educated, still he can't understand the personality of Godhead or the appearance of the Super Soul or the difference between the body and the soul. So, that's because of the mixture of the modes of material nature. So the mode of goodness conditions one to happiness, passion to fruitive action, and ignorance. It covers one's knowledge and binds one to madness. So we can stop here tonight. And Prabhu, since it's just you and me, do you have any questions or comments?
Not really, Prabhu. I think majority of these verses are sort of self-explanatory. You just got to meditate on them a little to get a full essence and understanding of them.
Yeah. All right. So we can stop here tonight, and Shri Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai. Jai. Hari Bol.